Welcome to the Value Maker podcast. My name is Ryan Purvis. I'm your host, supported by Heather Bicknell, as we meet with the people that make the digital workspace work. It's about the technology, it's about improving people's work experience and finding the return on value.
Welcome, Kat, to the Value Makers podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Caterina Maniscalco, but for the sake of ease, you can call me Kat. I'm a digital transformation, innovation, and change director and advisor. I've worked with clients in nearly every sector in the US, the UK, Europe, and Asia. I do probably have a bit more of a subject matter domain area in the financial services. I started my career as a technologist. So I was a coder, a developer, and a technical director before I pivoted towards a degree, towards an MBA and then a career in consulting. And in more recent times, I've been focused on AI transformation and what that means for businesses. But that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And what made you switch? Did you have a natural inclination to switch away from being technical, or were you pushed that way?
That's a great question because the thing is, what happened then, and I think it sometimes still happens now, is that you find projects are designed and scoped by partners or leaders who may not necessarily have a technical understanding of the feasibility or the impact or consequences of the choices they make when they design these projects. And as a developer, and even as a technical director, sometimes I would be handed a project to deliver that was inherently flawed in its design. And it would be incredibly frustrating. So I knew that in order to correct this, I needed to be in the room where not to quote Hamilton, but in the room where it happens. And I needed to be in the decision-making room where I can make an impact and shape that correctly. I think it happens less now, but to be honest with you, that idea is still pushing me to do the same now. So in order for me to consult and advise my clients well, it's not just that I have a view of AI strategy. I've gone back, especially in the last couple of years, to my coding roots to learn how to code Python and build my own models, machine learning models, so that I can talk to my clients and advise them from the point of view and the perspective of someone who understands the inner workings, the pitfalls and the challenges they might not need to be mindful of. Not that I'm necessarily interested in pursuing a career in data science. I feel like I need to understand things at a deeper level to do right by my clients. So that was the reason I pivoted towards consulting, but it's also the reason why I won't ever step too far away from those technology roots. I think you need both.
100%. The reason why I asked the question like I did is that I started off my Microsoft career. So I had a Java Linux career before that. And I was very quickly told by my peers that it was safer for me not to be writing code for production and rather to do the sort of consulting work. It was all like good-natured fun. And I agree with them. I always say if my code gets into production, and there are places that still use my code in production, we've run out of options and it's fine. But I agree with you. You have to have a technology background. And I had a very good CEO who I used to sit there as a CTO and try and explain stuff to him. And he actually went on courses and he came back and he said, okay, this weekend I did a course on programming. Now I understand what you're trying to say, where it's not just quickly
That's
write some
refreshing.
code. Yeah,
That's really refreshing. The other thing, but what I would say is I really value a CTO taking time out because of his role to go and learn programming and manage his team more than having a really good programmer or developer get promoted to that role. Because I think this is one of my bugbears, and controversial as it might be, I think you can be really good at a discipline, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily good at managing people. And I think those are two very different ideas, two different disciplines and ways of working. And you can be a brilliant developer and you should be rewarded as such if you are. But it doesn't mean you necessarily have the mindset or the people skills to manage a team. I love hearing about a CTO that maybe wasn't a programmer before, but goes and learns the discipline to connect with the team and understand their work, while I'm assuming what was prioritized was the good management of a team and the strategic thinking that's required.
Oh, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We actually had this discussion a lot about how the title of CTO has become so blurred with that of a lead developer. And it's to give prestige to hire somebody, but actually the reality they're there to code 80% of the time or 90% of the time. And you've actually lost the tech lead role.
Mm-hmm.
And often people are put in and then they get this title and then it's behavioral economics. You've given them the title of CDO, now you can't take it away.
That's exactly right.
But meanwhile, they are not doing the job of a CTO. They're actually a really good individual contributor
Mm-hmm.
trying to do the other stuff.
It
You can't
happens
be
far
good at
too
both.
often.
You can't be good at both. You can only be average at both.
Mm. Yeah. It's a really delicate balancing act and it's hard. I'm sure there are people out there who maybe are, but I think something has to give. And I don't think it's 50-50. You're more like 60-40, 70-30. It's, yeah, I agree.
Great. So you wrote a book.
Yeah.
You want to talk about your book?
Okay. Yeah. It's basically, it puts forth an idea that we all need to rethink the way we see leadership. I think we get to a point where we just assume it's built into our biases that leadership comes from one person and it's a leader. It's someone at the top of a pyramid. We have a traditional hierarchical view. And in some ways, this was bought in. We bought into this when we were young, when we were children, when we were watching cartoons and Superman saves the day. Or when we think about in most of the stories, we have a time of tragedy. Who's the hero? We always make that assumption that it's going to be a single individual. And I think what I basically suggested is that leadership, especially in digital innovation and transformation, it would be better to adopt a couple leadership model. So 2 leaders, they can be peer-to-peer or they can be hierarchical. My preference is peer-to-peer. And it's not just any 2 people, but it is 2 people that work well together, have perhaps complementary skill sets and experiences to bounce ideas off of each other, keep the other one in check. I think in some regard, we all do this anyway. When we have to make big, challenging decisions, we tend to have someone we consult with, that we revisit our thinking, we have them play devil's advocate. And I think that by formalizing it into an actual role, into a model for that leadership roles, what we're doing is we're sending a lot of messages. We're sending a message that we want our teams to be collaborative and we want to check our egos at the door. And we're going to demonstrate it by showing you what it looks like at the leadership level. I think we start to spread the risk so that it's not one person's head on the chopping block when things don't always go well. And ideally, we're working in environments where we're allowed to fail fast and we have that psychological safety to take some chances. But when they don't go well, because they can't always go well 100% of the time, I think that shared risk is valuable because ultimately you might want a name that's accountable, but there are multiple people that factor into that choice. I think there's something to be said for accepting that while many of us have a multidisciplinary background, we can't always see every dimension or every perspective, right? So if I'm looking to drive a new innovation product, it might be that as someone looking to drive an innovation, I might be more geared to taking chances, to taking a risk, to doing something new. Whereas maybe my finance director is going to be more concerned about the bottom line and what's our appetite for risk and how much of a risk is it? And is this sensible to be taking this risk at this particular time or in this particular market? It's a bit of a safety net in some regards. I also think it gives us an opportunity to make space for more diversity in leadership. I'm not necessarily advocating that we push, for example, if one of them is male, the other is female, or if one of them is English and the other person is whatever. I just think that even diversity of thought, even if we create the space to allow for someone to be complementary to the other party in multiple ways, including skill set, but not only, that brings value. And I also think that we have to acknowledge at some point that there is something innate in all of us, but especially those of us who work in innovation and transformation, because we have to be a little bit mindful of our profiles and what making change and driving change can do for our careers. leadership roles in that space tend to be a little bit more narcissistic. Now, narcissism isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is constructive narcissism. There's also destructive narcissism, be it reactive narcissism or other forms of narcissism. And it's very easy sometimes to have your blinders on and be driven by what's going to give a good result to your career and what feels good and what looks good, and allow ourselves to buy into confirmation bias and groupthink. When you have that other person, that's there to be your Jiminy Cricket to your Pinocchio, let's say, someone who keeps your feet on the ground, makes you see another perspective. And so I guess that my view is that there are multiple benefits to a couple leadership model. And I have seen this attempted in lots of industries like financial services, technology. If you really think about it, you could argue that this is going back a few decades ago, but once upon a time, the traditional leadership model in the home was very much a couple leadership model, mom and dad, because while if we go back generations, it might have been typical at the time for the man to go out and bring and work from a financial perspective. From your operational director, your human resources director was your mom, for example. I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't such a far-fetched idea that we share leadership responsibilities across more than one person. And it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost silly that we haven't gotten to that in the business world already. But I do believe that it addresses a lot of the challenges that we're concerned about.
So a couple of questions.
Mm.
So by using the word couple, I'm assuming you mean two and limited to two. But I could see conceivably, if as a COO or a CEO or whatever it is, you might have a couple relationship with a different region or a different business unit where the COO would have a fraction of what they would care about working with that regional leader to own their region.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have many couples together to create a cohesive picture.
Yes, you could. I think that at some point, if you were working with an international or global business, those international stakeholders come together and have to work that way anyway. But I think in each of those markets, the decisions that are made, those still need to be sense checked by someone who feels that same pain of the market, who sees the experiences that you're feeling in that market. So I don't think it's enough to bring together, let's say, your finance director in Germany and your finance director in the States and your finance director in Spain. I think in each of those geographies, you need that leader to have that hearing.
Yeah, okay. I've worked in two different types of businesses like that. One where it's a federated model, where each country or region has a CEO and a COO, and that could form that pair, and then they report into a global equivalent, global CEO, global COO, etc. Versus having a business that's completely globalized, where the exec runs everything, and then there's above that heads of a country or whatever it is, but there's no fragmentation. I suppose there's pros and cons to either. The other question I had around the narcissism, we need that as a human to survive.
Yeah.
So it does definitely exist. But I like and I don't know if you read the book Rocket Fuel.
I've spoken about it with people. I'm familiar with it, but I have not yet read it.
Oh, okay. So the thing
it's on my list.
It's a good read. And where I think this correlates very nicely with what you've got. And I haven't read your book, obviously, so I need to read it. But they have the concept of a visionary and an integrator.
Yes.
And I think that to me makes sense, because you do have often, even small businesses, you have someone who has to drive the vision, but then they need to have someone behind them that connects it all together, because you can't drive the vision and worry about all the inner workings of your business at the same time.
Exactly. And that's why I made a note of the complementary backgrounds and skill sets. So you wouldn't necessarily put two visionaries together. It defeats the purpose. Yeah. And it just occurred to me, by the way, because I'm not used to self-promotion. I didn't mention the title of my book. So it is Distributed Leadership and Digital Innovation, the argument for couple leadership. But I think that visionary and that integrator combination is ideal, because you need that pragmatist to put an anchor to those dreams of that visionary, but you need that pragmatist to have someone to say, look, the art of the possible is greater than this. Let's push a little bit out of your comfort zone. And together, ideally find a happy medium. But what I want to go back to just briefly is, I think you made reference to this sort of dynamic with two C-suite roles. And I think what I want to call out is, at some point I mentioned, yes, you could do this in an official formal model, or you could do this in an informal model if you just consult with someone. But part of the value in the formality of the model is that there isn't a place where the COO can say, this is my role. This is not your role. Thanks for your opinion, but I'm going to go in a different direction. Right? This is more of you're both working to achieve the same roles of that office, right? I won't talk about it as a role because it suggests a singular leader. That office of, let's say, chief of operations, for example, let's say, you have more than one voice. You have two voices, and they may not always agree, but you have another voice. Maybe it's finance, maybe it's innovation, whatever it might be, that plays that devil's advocate role with that complementary view in shaping that decision. So there is basically a sort of brakes put on the risk. How do I say this? You're minimizing the risk of, in the case that you have it, a destructive narcissist taking over without care willy-nilly for what others are saying. And you do have occasionally leaders who will allow you to speak your piece, but then ultimately their decisions are their decisions, to hell with what anyone else says. And so sometimes it works out. And when it does, it fuels that behavior further, but eventually it doesn't, and there are consequences. So I think that's where I guess I see this as being different to, I don't know, just two C-suite officers talking about the same project.
And maybe the thing here, and I don't know if you've read Team of Teams. So it's always the best example for me and it's the US military for those who haven't read it, and how they've switched from a hierarchical structure to a more network structure. And as you were explaining that, I was thinking actually that this is sometimes the biggest problem in businesses, where because you have a title or a role, it is automatic assumption that you're the final say, or you're the final thing. And it also comes down to the personality you're dealing with. But if you use the word office, but I would use initiative or objective. If the objective is whatever, let's say increase revenue, that's the objective. Then the CRO would work with whoever it is as the counterbalance, maybe it's product or maybe it's customer success or whatever it is, to address revenue. And that would give you the two voices potentially, co-leaders, but they have two different perspectives to the same problem. And within that, you would have the different themes.
Yes, I like that. And actually, it's one of the arguments for why, so long as both voices are given the same merit, that's an argument for me for why a hierarchical couple leadership model could also work. I think it also sends a message that leadership doesn't have to come from the top of the pyramid. And actually, in a lot of the transformation and change work that I do, I've over time developed my own methodology. And in doing so, I've prioritized certain principles, one of which is the push for flatter hierarchies. And that's sometimes easier to do than in others, depending on how traditional business is and the appetite for it. But if we accept that leadership isn't a role, but it's a behavior that we want to nourish and encourage to flow in all of our teams, that in itself is a good start, because good ideas can come from anywhere. And fortunately, there seems to be more of a warming to this than there was several years ago. But there's a lot of value in flat hierarchies. And as someone who was once a technologist and developer who worked in agile teams, that principle in agile methodology is very deeply rooted. And I'm an advocate for agile methodology where it's best suited in projects for that reason as well.
For the self-organizing part of it, where the team self-organizes and self-manage? Is that the part you mean? Or?
To a degree, but I think what we learned from agile methodology isn't just, besides process, what I really love about it is the mindset and philosophy. The principles in the Agile Manifesto about the way teams work with each other and the way they treat each other, and the focus on people and customers, and there's a lot of principles there that I think can be taken and carried further outside of working in Agile or delivering a product. Things like customer centricity, themes like transparency, Themes like continuous learning. We don't know it all. We need an environment to fail fast and make mistakes and learn. I think that extends far beyond a development team building an app, let's say.
Mm. Yeah, and there's got to be, and it's also a mindset shift from almost how you taught at school, where it's only the good sides, it's never the bad. In fact, I was talking with one of my guys this week, and we were talking about failure, and he didn't want to do something because he thought he didn't want to feel like he was a failure. And I said, well, if you don't do it, you'll always be a failure because you didn't do anything. And you can almost see the penny drop, like, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. If you do it and you learn from it, first attempt in learning, that's what fail stands for. You'll get somewhere. So I think it is a deprogramming thing in your culture, but also I quite like this joint ownership of the objective. It is counter to some of the stuff that I speak about, which is to have one throat to choke. But I could see the value of having, even in that case, the person who owns it still should be getting second opinions and lobbying and all the rest of it anyway. So I can see the value there. What drove you to write a book about? It must have been driven by something.
Oh, yeah. I think over the years, I had, over time, accumulated so many bad experiences with so many bad leaders. And I share a couple of case studies in the book as well that are just jaw-dropping. But when I did my MBA at Work Business School, and I took a course there called Leadership in the Art of Judgment. And prior to that, I got to be honest, I was doing my dissertation on a completely different topic. I think it was something related to marketing strategy. But this course changed my life. It changed my mindset on leadership. And I took principles that I learned from that course into my professional life and into my personal life. And I saw exponential growth following that. And coincidentally, I had the good fortune of being able to, by chance, a very exceptional chance, sit in it again last week for the first time in almost a decade. And it was great to have a refresher of those principles again. And it was, again, I found it so influential and meaningful that I decided to start my dissertation over from scratch and focus on leadership and good leadership and what that could look like. And so that course, led by the magnificent Harry Sukas, that course and the experiences that I had through the years came together to produce what was my dissertation and then eventually my book, which was, it still has all of the dense research that went into it, but it also has some practical tips on how you might enact a leadership model like this in your business.
So if you had to give a sort of 3 things or 5 things, don't give the whole story away, but what would you suggest people to do if they wanted to do this?
Top 3, let's say. I would say, first of all, prepare yourselves to be uncomfortable. This is different. This is going to be new for you, whoever, if you're doing the hiring, but also your team, the team that's going to be led by this duo, and also the rest of the business that's going to have to learn to engage with this office or this initiative, this objective team. It's going to be a change. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable and there's a learning curve. I think then there's a decision that needs to be made on how you're going to hire and evaluate, because the ideal is that the responsibilities of that office or that objective are split into 2, and each one is accountable for the other, but they still obviously consult with each other. But you cannot necessarily double up on everything because you need to be able to divide and conquer on a lot of this while getting the other person's point of view. You operate as a team, much like in the example that you raised. If you have a visionary and an integrator, that vision's it might be to deliver a product or a service, but the vision side of things is going to sit with that particular role who is the visionary. So So that engagement style needs to be designed and well thought. And finally, I think it's a little bit tricky to hire if you're not building this from within. If you're going to hire into this role, you need to make sure that those 2 have chemistry and trust. Because if you don't have that psychological safety in the other person, that you know that if they're challenging you, it's coming from a good place. It's not coming from someone with ill intentions, or it's not an ego move. That trust is everything for that duo. So I think if you hiring someone for the role and then hiring someone else to support them can be, if you hire someone that they know, it's a double-edged sword because they might have a well-practiced working relationship, but it might be that they're just comfortable not being challenged. So you need to be, it's just what you need to do when you take this on is have someone oversee it who has a heightened level of emotional awareness, self-awareness, and EQ, basically. That's really what's necessary to make sure that this works.
So like in couple counseling, you might need a facilitator.
Yes. Absolutely. Because chances are, if the other two haven't worked that way before, it might be uncomfortable, but doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means they have to work out the nuts and bolts. You have to make sure it's not ego driving a lot of the challenges. I think about places, I've given talks about this before where I've mentioned case studies where this model has been put into action, be it in technology and financial services, what have you. What I find over time, and this is actually an area of research that I'd like to see on following the book, is that these couple leadership roles, they have not, for whatever reason, always worked out. And what's never revealed is why. For example, we had for a long time, Salesforce leadership had a co-CEO model. And I think that was probably tricky because they may not have done the division of what parts of the CEO role were going to be given to each other. It might have been a chemistry thing. It might have been an ego thing. But I would love to know why, because there are cases in other places where, for example, the case that I mentioned in my dissertation went on for over 10 years. It was a very successful couple leadership model that really thrived. If you don't have that person to help facilitate the transition into this way of working, it might be more uncomfortable.
Yeah. And when you were explaining the co-CEO thing, I was thinking exactly that. If you don't know what the border, what the boundary lines are, potentially, I don't know if you played any hockey, but you have two referees in hockey. And so the way the field is spread, and you got obviously baseline to baseline, and you got a D on each side where you can score goals from. You have to be inside the D to shoot. So how it typically works, you've got a 22 meter or 25 meter line. But what happened is the referee between the two 25-meter lines, they can both make decisions. They can both call for fouls or whatever it is. But once you cross into the opposite side, the other referee doesn't say anything. So you own your D, you own your 25. They own their D and they own their 25. In the middle, it's a free for all for the referee point of view. And because the game moves so quickly, especially now with the way they've changed the rules and stuff. I'm talking about field hockey on AstroTurf, so not ice hockey. There's no way that one referee can do it. And the same as football, you have the lines people, then you have the referee in the middle. And rugby has the lines people in the middle, and you've brought technology in. So what I was thinking about while you were talking about this, obviously that analogy is from a balanced scorecard point of view. You could use that as a way to define the roles and responsibilities of these two people in the couple. See who owns which piece, and then where do they overlap to own it as well. And maybe use OKRs or something like that as a mechanism to work on those things. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in the book, I also talk about how you assess leaders in this model, because then you have to think about performance assessment in a very different way as well. But the way that you described using field hockey, perhaps as an example, I think is a far more succinct and efficient way of trying to say what I was saying in far too many words. But that is a beautiful metaphor for how this could work. Very, very much. Yeah, that hits it on the head.
Fantastic. There's something else I wanted to ask you about, and I've just lost your profile. Give me 1 second just to find your LinkedIn again. Just something that jumped out when I was reading you commented on some responsible and ethical AI stuff.
Yes.
And I wanted to get your view on that.
Okay. I am excited to be working on an initiative called Project Human. And what I'm working with lots of leaders in the UK and outside the UK who are really interested in taking an idea like we've seen the recently published EU AI Act. And I think what we're looking to do is see what that could look like for the UK and what that could look like UK and beyond. Perhaps have a look at how we can help businesses take what is an abstract framework and turn it into something that's more meaningful and practical, and what that could look like. What does responsible AI actually look like when you're putting it into practice in your businesses? And we're all spread all over the world, and we're bringing different experiences and points of view to the table. And I think what I'm really excited about is that I'm waving the flag for maintaining the human in the AI experience. I think just because something is possible, just because we can do something, doesn't mean that we should necessarily. And I think that there's something to be said for, look, we have a little bit of hindsight with time if we think about Web 2.0 and social media and what's happened to the world since then. And it's facilitated people from from different corners of the world coming together and conversing and communicating. It's brought a lot of good for sure, but it's also created a world where, before a 6-month-old can speak, they know how to swipe left and right and scroll. Right. And, I just think that there's, about 2015, I started to have these ideas that maybe we have a responsibility to think about what the long-term social and personal impacts of new technologies are going to be, because it's happening at such a pace that we can't keep up, and without regulation. Because the truth of the matter is, if someone tells you to even not to do something, an innovative idea that you want to do, whether it's going to bring the destruction of the world or not, the reality is most of us can go into our garage or in our basement, tinkle with the computer, learn some programming, and everybody has the ability and the capability of building a new innovative product, solution, whatever it might be. So should there not be someone that has a voice around the bigger picture? And since then, we've seen the development of entities like the Center for Humane Technology based in the United States, which I'm a big fan of. And I think what they do is really important. But there aren't any truly serious implications to not being ethical in the work that we do. Otherwise, we'd have seen far bigger fines and impositions on companies like many social media companies I won't mention. So I think now that we're embarking on AI on just a completely new level, especially since the advent of ChatGPT 4.0 and further iterations, I think we have to stop ourselves and think about, what does it mean for us as people to engage in AI the way, and not just AI, but other forms of, what I mean by this is not just AI in the forms that we all speak about, like ChatGPT, AI and machine learning tools beyond that. For example, just a small slither for consideration would be the anthropomorphization that we see in not just robotics, but in chatbots. To what degree is it ethical for us to make efforts to mimic a human on the other end of that screen, or the other end of that robot? And you can argue both sides. Perhaps in a nursing home where patients may not get that many visits, having a more human experience, artificial as it might be, comforting. Then you have the tragic story of the teenager who killed himself after being advised by his pseudo girlfriend chatbot that he had bonded with that it would be a good thing to do, because in that other space they could be together. These are really important questions, and it's fun in games when we're all just chatting to on the other end of a screen to what is artificial but feels like the celebrity of our dreams, maybe. But there are full and serious implications to new technologies, and I think we have a responsibility to consider them and be mindful of them. We take into consideration, for example, the way financial services leverages AI and machine learning to identify cases of preventing fraud, or discerning what your credit check approval, whether it should be approved or not approved based on past history. To what extent is that discriminatory? Because the thing is, if you're rooting it on past data, you're assuming that future data future inputs would be similar. But we've all been told that's not true and that's not real. That's why we get every caution every time we make an investment in the stock market. Past performance is not a reflection of future earnings, and so on and so forth. What are the challenges around that? And is it realistic to make it, if it's even possible, to make what we're producing bias free? Should we be making an effort to reproduce the world that we live in? Or should we be should we be creating a utopia that maybe we can't really connect with because utopia is so far from where we are? These are really big questions that it's very easy to get lost in the philosophy of it all. And obviously, that's why there are other people in this team who make sure that we keep our feet on the ground. But I think that there is a space for these kinds of considerations. And I would like to hope that we won't make the same mistakes that we did in the advent of social media, where we ignored them, because I think the implications with artificial intelligence are far bigger than they were with social media alone.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I've been listening to and reading about it. And your point about regulation not keeping up, it moves. The government's, the only way they could keep up, it would be to use AI to keep up. And the guy that I was listening to today on Lex Friedman's podcast, the amount of work they're putting in to do checks on the models and the models to check the models.
Yes.
Because no one really understands how the models are now actually working intrinsically or internally. So it's got to be both driven by industry, but also driven by some ethical ethical themes, etc. So I 100% agree. And while you were talking about the previous experience doesn't lead to future activities, I was thinking about there was a study they did with a whole bunch of punters to predict horse racing. Well, I can't remember the exact detail of the story, but basically it was the further back they looked, the least accurate everyone was. And they had experienced gamblers and they had novices. So for a month in advance, they were all clearly inaccurate. And as they got closer and closer to the days of the race and that, there was a point where the experienced guys were slightly more accurate. But even then, as they got closer to the actual race, they became less as inaccurate as the novices. So there was almost a point where they had a slight edge, but there was never a real edge.
Well,
because at some point it's going to be variable anyway. And I think and you mentioned it, we've got machine learning, you've got vision, you've got these different flavors of AI. I don't think you can blanket it. I think you have to have boundaries in each of them. And I read a very scary book. It was fictional, but it's very close to real, and it was all around human trafficking and all that kind of stuff. And how they were using fake videos to create discourse. And often you go on YouTube even today and you'll look at an Elon Musk thing and you'll be saying something like, but you probably never said that. Like it's definitely generated, but it's so accurate or so cleanly done that you would struggle to tell if it's real or not.
This is the problem, right? Because when these new innovations come along, they're often, hopefully, not done with ill intention, but any technological advancement or innovation is a tool, right?
Yep.
And a tool can either be used for good or it can be used for evil. That's down to the individual's own character and moral and ethical code. And that's the challenge that we have, right? I remember having the same thought about when Google, I think it was this summer, Google released, the announcement was it's the end or the death of the selfie. That's what it was. Because it had this technology on your phone that I could take a photo of my friend sitting on the left side of the couch, and then my friend could take my phone and sit on the right side of the couch, and I could take a photo of them, and then you can transpose it, and it looks like one photo, like someone took the photo of the both of you. Lovely, wonderful. And it's a lovely story. It's very cute. But what about suddenly finding yourself in a position where a person's actual presence is being, if someone isn't actually there and you're taking an image and transposing it, the implications of being framed, of being somewhere where you weren't, are huge. Yep. But then the most serious issue is that especially in a globalized world, the problem is that ethics are not universal. Ethics are subjective, right?
Yeah.
So what's ethical for me or you in the Western world is going to be different in Eastern. You take into consideration East versus West, North versus South, culture, gender. It's so complex, and getting people to agree collectively is going to be hard. And you can't just, you can have country specific sets of ethics, but at some point, if you want to engage with the global world, they're going to collide. And then what do we do?
You mentioned the sort of prediction algorithms around your health, industrial health score, your financial score. That's happening in Asia right now. If you're on WeChat, it's all been calculated. There were people that were banned from, they couldn't use the public transport. They couldn't go to certain buildings because they had been deemed socially unacceptable, for want of a better phrase. I can't remember the exact details. And this is like a Revelations book or something where it said, don't move to one currency. But we're already there. If you think about it, it's all electronic.
Yeah.
Forget about crypto and all the rest of it. I paid someone in cash the other day. They're like, oh, I'm so glad you paid in cash. I was like, why? Because it just feels more tangible when people pay in cash. Otherwise, it's just in my bank account. I never see it. I was like, oh, okay. And I think to your point about things moving quickly, the problem we have is that people are making money out of it moving quickly.
Yes.
And how do you steer it when commercially it's been driven by people who have a stock price that they have to deliver on?
That's the same with any kind of change that I'm trying to drive, right? I have to frame the situation so that the ethical choice, the good choice, is ultimately the thing that's going to drive profits, right? You can look at it from a short-term perspective, or you can look at it from a medium and long-term perspective. The problem is that most roles at that high level, you expect someone, at least at the time of writing my book, it was like approximately 3 years for a person to be in that role. So they want to make their mark before they move on. And that's not always a lot of time to demonstrate meaningful change and success. So it's difficult to get people in those roles to think about the long term. But if you can shape the conversation around maybe, and it depends on what drives the person, but if it's legacy, if it's making a meaningful mark on the world, and even if it's none of those personal things, if it's aligning what you're talking about to the business values that should be driving the business, like a captain driving a ship, if you align what you're doing to the business values and acting too quickly at the risk of maybe the greater good, if that's not aligning to the values, then that in itself is reason to maybe pause and reflect.
Yep. No, look, I think it's a movement for sure. And you've got to create, and I think there are a lot of people, it's the same as with ESG. It starts as a small thing and you build it out and you get more people to do it. And you pick vendors that have the same values as you do. And I think it's got to be people in big companies that make the change. So it filters out that way.
It's funny that you say that, because the ESG movement is one, and the regulations around it and how that's being managed is a reference point for one of the reference points for how Project Human is addressing the creation of this framework. So we are definitely looking to learn from examples like that.
Fantastic. So how would someone get involved with this? We get hold of you.
They can't get a hold of me. Yes. And there is going to be imminently soon a website to learn more about what we're doing and how we're doing it and how you can get involved. But otherwise, the easiest and fastest way is to get a hold of me. And then if I can't loop you in directly, which I can't see why I couldn't, I will loop you into the right people, because there are different parts of this program, whether it's framework development or looking at use cases. And depending on how someone wants to get involved, I could steer them to the right individual.
Fantastic. It's been great chatting with you, Kat.
It's been a pleasure.
LinkedIn would probably be the best link to give everybody for you.
Absolutely. LinkedIn is great.
Fantastic.
They can have my email as well if they like, but I check my LinkedIn daily as often as I check anything else.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much for your time today. Great stuff. Have a good day.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. Help us grow our network. Please also check out our website at www.valuu.work and our product that's on there. It's something we worked really hard on. We hope that it benefits you.